Hey there, thanks for tuning in. I'm coming with another Thriving Thursday training for you, and I'm going to share my screen in a bit. But before I do, I want to say that I'm excited about a summer workshop coming up, so I'll give you more information about that in a minute, which will relate to our training. So I'm going to share the old iPad, so hopefully you can see that. This lovely triangle, it's a great framework for me on everything I like to teach. So I'm going to look over here. You can see my whiteboard. I'm going to look over here on my notes. I came up with about 15 minutes ago. So I'm looking at the three pillars of live composing. So for me, live composing can be improvising on your instrument, but I'm really focused now about using methods or tools like sound painting, sign language for live composing, or what I've learned from conduction, a lexicon of signs and gestures. So whatever path, and I've created my own hybrid path here, there are fundamental principles here about this. And we got a leaf blower happening outside my office, so apologies in advance if it's a little noisy. But first I want to look at the three obstacles that I see a lot of people struggle with when they're working on trying to compose live. So the first one is people, and by people I mean like a composer conductor right now, often find themselves frozen. So they might just freeze in the moment, right? Happens so often when people are beginning. They come up, they try to direct a group in collaboratively composing, and all of a sudden something happens, but they're just stuck. And you can see deer in the headlights because they don't know where to go. They're completely frozen. All right. And we can talk about the power limitations. But one of the things I find that helps to get to the opposite of that is transforming into a state of curiosity, right? And we'll look at those two parts of really practically how to become curious in the moment about what's happening and get fully present. So that's one transition from sort of frozen to that, what I put like from red light to green light, right? To being curious about what's happening. And that'll help you flow. The second big obstacle I find people struggle with is they're really flighty, right? They dash from one idea to another. They're trying to do too much. They throw a lot of signs at the ensemble. They go from place to place to place to place, and there's no real focus to that. And for me, the virtue that gets you to the opposite of that is being committed, right? Committed to whatever's happening, saying yes to that idea once you've found that idea and saying yes to it and committing to it and investing in it. We'll talk more about that in a minute. And the third, and again, I'm looking over at my whiteboard here. These are fresh, is people often fight. If I can spell, people often fight to hang on to an idea when it's past this expiration date, right? They struggle with where the ensemble or the moment is shifting or going. And these three fight, flight, or freeze are very fundamental fear responses we have when we're not feeling safe. And there's nothing riskier really in music than stepping into that moment and opening yourself up to a very vulnerable process of creating on the fly, right? So that third obstacle people have of they're fighting what's happening and they're not really opening up to where the piece wants to go. This may seem like a bit of an oxymoron, but it actually takes some courage, which for me is obviously the opposite of fear. Right? So courage is not necessarily to battle or wrestle or struggle, which might be appropriate in other contexts, but courage to actually surrender. And that's the first phase of really being curious. For me, it's the prerequisite for being curious. So how do we become curious and committed and courageous in our live composing? So there are two parts to me for curiosity. One is just surrendering on stage. That's almost a prerequisite to really composing in the moment. You just got to let go of your preconceptions, let go of maybe the sequence of signs you had planned out, let go of maybe even what's called a palette or something pre-composed on the page. Limitations are absolutely freeing, but sometimes you come with a frame to a live composition and that frame's too tight. So I find the best prerequisite moves, just sort of like the ground floor, is to surrender, right? Surrender to what is. It's a very in the moment practice. But once you surrender, what's next? Well, then you've got to start searching. And this is an expansion of some ideas I've shared earlier in this group, but it's really starting to congeal for me and cohere into a framework that not only makes sense, hopefully, so give me some feedback, what's landing for you, but also really takes you through a method and a practice of composing live. So what do I mean by search, right? Giving yourself the willingness to go hunting for that idea from an ensemble. I'll talk more about this in my membership group, but one of the signs that's simple but so powerful is a sign called scanning, right? Where you're searching through the ensemble for some idea, some nugget to latch onto. And that takes us to our next phase. What does it take to be committed? There are two parts of that one. You got to learn how to select an idea. Just say yes to that idea. And this process could take minutes or it could take milliseconds, right? And the more masterful you are, the more comfortable you are with this cycle, this process, and then you can step right into moving right from surrender to search to selecting. All right. So picking, on some level, it doesn't really matter, but you have to really follow your intuition and your ears and your listening and select that idea that you're then going to support. And what I mean by support, you're going to reinforce, you're going to invest, you're going to sync up with, you're going to accompany, you're going to enhance, right? So you selected that motif, you're supporting it, and then you've got to step into this last phase, which is often really tough when something's working, right? And you want to see it keep working, but you realize that you've got to surrender yet again to that next phase of the composition in the moment, right? So what does it mean to be creative? So you've got to learn how to do two things. You've got to learn how to shift, right? So that could be taking idea and transposing it. It could be inverting it. It could be changing the rhythm of it. It could be any type of development, right? If you've done any motivic elaboration or development as a soloist, you're familiar with that process of taking one little idea and getting, as my colleague and good mentor, Jeff Agrell would say, as much as possible from as little as possible, right? But you're shifting that idea. You're kicking it about, as another mentor, Anthony Braxton would say, you're just kicking it about, you're shifting it. But at some point, you've got to learn how to segue to the next section of the piece. And for me, I've got a whole training on models from actually film editing that have helped me as a composer, and especially live composer, learn how to segue from one section to another. And those transitions are really where some mastery and artistry can come into play, of segueing from one to the other. So this whole phase, sort of three pillars: curiosity, commitment, and courage, broken up into these 6 steps: surrendering, searching, selecting, supporting, shifting, and segueing. I love not only acronyms, but I love alliteration, are for me the heart of this process. So I'm going to stop share and give you an invitation. Like I said, if you want a deeper dive on this, I've got a monthly membership. You can go month to month. I'm going to go a little deeper into actually the signs and gestures that I find support this process of composing live. Some of my best tips of the most simple but powerful signs that can do each of these sort of 6 stages of live composing. But I'm going to work on a 3-day workshop coming up here. So if you want information about that, it'll be virtual. It'll be a segue actually to an in-person workshop, which also has a virtual component, but that's going to be later in July. But I'm looking over this, I think next week, just to do an even longer training on this here in this group, and I'll invite people to it. So if you want information on that, just put workshop, and I'll give you some details on that and keep you in the loop on that. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know what tickles your fancy, and I'll talk to you soon.